uniformly all over India, which is not spoken in southern Indian states.
And what about the other opposition parties? What is their religious profile?
So there are a few smaller parties that represent Muslim interests. There hasn't actually nationally, because the Indian National Congress, which was in power, for the largest chunk of time since India became independent, it is seen, as the secular party, and therefore, traditionally you would actually have, Muslims voting for the Indian National Congress. What the BJP has done in its campaign is it wants to galvanize its support from the 80% Hindu population. And I think that's led other parties to think about, do they have to actually as well, appease the Hindus to actually win an election in India, given the sheer size of the Hindu population. And so, people from the Muslim community who I've spoken to in the run-up to the election really confused now about whether there is a party that they feel firmly represents their interests.
And of course, many of the Muslim communities feel that they can't voice their opposition to the BJP.
Well, there have been incidents, some very shocking incidents of violence against Muslims in India. There's the citizenship law that I was talking about, which excludes Muslims and is seen as anti-Muslims. We've had human rights groups coming out with reports raising concerns about demolitions carried out by different government agencies, which they say are specifically targeted at Muslim businesses, Muslim shops and Muslim homes. And we have seen that in some states, if when there's a protest, if it's carried out by people from the Muslim community, we've seen in Uttar Pradesh, for example, that the leader, who was a part of the protest, he was accused of rioting, and then his house was demolished. So, what human rights groups are saying is that this is a way to stifle the voice. It's a way of scaring people into not actually coming out to protest.
Yogita Limaye and India's election results won't be out until June. That adult social care is facing a crisis with high levels of staff turnover and a chronic shortage of carers. Love's Labours is a new report from the Christian think tank Theos, which calls for the integration of theological ideas of love and dignity in the whole policy debate, rather than just arguing about economics. Well, we'll be talking to its author in a moment, but first we hear from David, who's in his mid-80s and lives in the Midlands. He has disabilities that leave him with severely limited mobility, and he relies on carers to support every day.
They get 60 minutes at breakfast, 30 minutes at lunch, 20 minutes at tea, 30 minutes at bed call. So I know 5 minutes before they come, I switch everything off and hopefully give them the limited time they have to look after me.
So there's not much time then for chat or any extras, they're just doing their task, are they?
Exactly, yes.
And is it a different person each time, or do you get consistency of carers?
No, I get consistency during the week, but at weekends it does vary.
And have you been able, in that timetable, to build a relationship with the carers? Is there a sense of sort of knowing them and them knowing you?
Yes, there is. Although the company, and I'm not faulting the company, they have told them just to do the necessary tasks.
So they're under pressure, are they, not to do any extra things for you or to chat to you?
That is correct.
So this new report is saying that there should be more value put on carers, and also that, the idea of love should be in the care system, because at the end of the day that makes more effective care. Can you see how that would be built into your current schedule?
Difficult. It's a very good proposal, but it's very difficult for them because of their time restrictions placed upon them. The carers I have, the carers that I have, want to do more, but they're totally restricted on the allocated time given to them by the local council.
Well, listening to David is Hannah Rich from Theos, the author of that report. Hannah, David is pretty clear there, isn't he? There's just no time on the rota for carers to bring in more love into their caring role.
Yeah, absolutely. We are with that. devaluation of care work, that restriction of it in economic terms is because of a fundamental misunderstanding of what care is, what work is, and what the role of love within that. If you think of it only in those narrow kind of economic terms that David's laid out for us there, then there isn't space for things like love and relationship to be valued. But if we turn on its head the way we value the whole idea of care, the way we think of it, then there is space for that to come into narrative.
So why did you want to do this report, looking at the social care crisis through a sort of theological lens and through these ideas of love and dignity?
Well, I guess one of the perks of being a theological think tank as we are is that we get to bring in these ideas and we get to see how they apply to some of the biggest political problems of our time. And we're really clear that there is a crisis in the social care sector that is in part economic, and that is a really difficult one to solve, and it's one that's not necessarily been solved in current political terms, but it's also a crisis that is relational. We think that if there is more economic resource into the system, that doesn't inherently solve that problem. Putting in more money and more time into the care system is very necessary and really clearly needed at the moment. If we do that without reimagining what the point of a care is, what the role of that is, then it doesn't necessarily reach the goal of bringing relationships and bringing love into that sector.
Well, of course, the government is very firm that it is bringing more resources into the care sector. A spokesperson from the Department of Health and Social Care said to us that they're proud of the health care staff and recognise their great commitment working day and night, and that also they respect the outstanding quality, personalised and accessible work that they do. They also say that they've made major work reforms, including providing new accredited qualifications. So clearly there's some movement there with the government. What do you say to that?
That's very welcome, but I think what we're arguing is that more material resources without greater attention to the importance of love and relationship will that building relationships, that having a relationship and a rapport with the people you're looking after and thinking about love within that is in itself a skill, then the level of skill in the job completely becomes reversed in that sense.
So are you saying that even with more money, and the government has announced more money, it's just not going to work, it's not going to make that much difference unless you sort of rethink the whole profession and the way it's viewed in society?
It's not that it's not going to make much of a difference, it's clearly working, it's clearly very needed. But it's not the only solution, it's not the kind of silver bullet solution to the whole way we think about care. The reason that it's been underfunded in the first place and needed more funding is because of how we think about it. And if we just put more money into the sector without rethinking long term actually the way that we imagine the whole role of care work and the role of work within that for people that work in the sector, then we're going to end up in the same position again.
Hannah Rich from Theos, thank you very much. Well, Taylor Swift has been breaking streaming records and enjoying wall-to-wall coverage of her new album. Another American pop star, Rihanna, has also squeezed herself a good deal of publicity. She's posed for a magazine cover dressed as a nun, a very sexy nun, pouting in lipstick and showing off her breasts. Well, is that image cheeky, rebellious or offensive? We asked David Compton, a veteran writer about pop music, for his thoughts.
Pop stars can't leave religion alone. From Patti Smith's assertion nearly 50 years ago now that
Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine.
And from the Pet Shop Boys in It's a Sin to John Lennon's claim that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus.
Imagine that, oh heaven.
When they're not talking about religion, pop stars are dressing up in its clothes. Many pop stars like to impersonate religious figures, whether it's Lil Nas X or Terence Trent D'Arby, both posed as Christ, or Beyonce as the Virgin Mary. And then there's nuns, and this latest transgression by Rihanna.
My name is Faustina When I saw the picture of Rihanna wearing nun's uniform, I was really offended. It was abhorrent, it was disgusting for me. And I'm a fan of Rihanna. I was really disappointed.
I'm Suzanne. I'm a mixed race British Palestinian female. I think that you have to be respectful of different cultures, and I think what Rihanna did is respectful.
The nun's uniform is a symbol of our faith, which represents their vow to poverty, chastity, and obedience, devoting themselves to a life of service. So, and that portrayal, using that attire, is just a mockery of those values.
Nuns. Popular culture has always had a weird relationship with nuns. History is filled with true and embroidered stories of convent lust, tales where getting into a nunnery was just the start. Gothic novels portray nuns as seething wells of libido waiting to explode. Medieval lore is full of tales of licentious nunneries, and for centuries the contrast between the celibate grace of nuns and the sexual morass of daily life has been exploited for fun and profit. Look at the movies of Ken Russell and Paul Verhoeven, and what hen night is complete without someone dressed as a nun shouting in traffic? Popular music is no different. It's often weirdly respectful of the women, and mostly the dressing up is restrained. Both Kate Bush and Sinead O'Connor pose as non-Republican nuns. And of course, let us never forget the most popular musical of all time. But why is it always nuns? No pop star has ever dressed up as a naughty mum. There are no rampant vergers or dirty deacons. Popular music heads for the dressing up box. It's almost always nuns.
My name is Eloise. I'm a journalist and author of the book What Women Want. The images of Rihanna dressed up as a saucy nun failed to shock me, even as a failed Catholic myself. And probably that's because it's such old hat. It's been done so many times. I think I dressed up as a nun in my university years. Pope and Mother Superior at a time when John Paul II was in quite ill health, so it's actually kind of refreshing to know that Catholics and Christians can still be a bit shocked by this.
Well, I'm Chris Greenup. I'm reader in social sciences at Edgewood University, and my research is around religion, gender, sexuality, and celebrities do have this lineage of provocative use of religious symbols. Why? Because religion is provocative, religion sells. Is the habit that Rihanna's wearing, is the nun symbol solely belonging to nuns, or does it belong to society and popular culture? Obviously she was trying to shock. That's the name of the game, isn't it? To draw attention to oneself, to get on magazine covers. But I do think there's bigger arguments that can be made here about the role of women and women's sexuality. Protests outside of abortion clinics, where Christian groups are often telling women that they're murderers, and so I think Rihanna did have this in mind. Obviously, I can't go into her brain and work out what she was thinking, but you know, she's playing back to that trope of women's sexuality being regulated. And what happens when, you know, we want to wear makeup and we want to subvert who we are? And I think it's quite empowering that she can do that.
If you think that this is some win for women's liberation in relation to attacks on abortion rights, well, it would be one thing if it were nuns stopping women from getting abortion. It's not. Main kind of thrust against abortion rights seems to be a sort of quasi-political, evangelical faction. I think it's just wrong to understand those very serious issues in terms of sort of church oppression these days. I'm not sure we can claim Rihanna as the saviour of women's freedom this time.
So, Rihanna's disgusting, lazy, inspiring, or just a bit dull. Here's what I think. I think as long as organised religion exists and remains tolerant, it will always be exploited by popular culture. And as long as popular culture remains adolescent, it will always be looking for a cheap thrill. Which is odd, because without religion, some say, there'd be no pop. Gospel begat soul and rhythm and blues, and they begat rock and pop, and so on down to the umpteenth generation. Sometimes pop and religion can have a happy relationship.
Oh, happy day. Oh, happy day. When Jesus...
David Quantick on the pop habit of dressing up as nuns. You're listening to Sunday. The time is just after 7:30. Later,
I want to know if, as a Christian, having a name that signifies oppression, brutality and destruction is actually spiritually healthy.
Professor Robert Beckford uncovers the roots of his surname.
I really, really want to win badly. And my buddies told me this morning, you know, my victory was secure on the cross. And that's a pretty special feeling, to know that I'm secure for forever. And it doesn't matter, you know, whether or not I win this tournament or if I lose this tournament. You know, my identity is secure for forever.
From breaking my foot to burning myself out completely, I think it was incredibly tough to come out of that. And I nearly didn't come out of that. I was ready to walk away from the sport. It wasn't really until I went back to church when I was burning out that community that is there no matter what. There are also people that are from all walks of life. And I was like, you know what, this puts a lot more into perspective, and I actually feel here, and not many places on earth that I feel at home and feel warm and feel welcome, and I can understand not only to be a better athlete, but be a better father, be a better partner, be a better friend or family, and that's what it's about now for me.
Golf Masters champion Scotty Scheffler and Olympic swimming gold medalist Adam Peaty talking publicly about their faith last week. So is it easier than it used to be for high-profile figures to talk about their beliefs? And does faith actually help, or can it hinder their performance? Well, to dive into the relationship between elite sport and religious belief, we have Daniel Jervis, an Olympic swimmer who's a Christian, and Katrina MacDonald, a senior lecturer in sport coaching at Anglia Ruskin University, a judo coach and a former international judo competitor. First, Daniel, how does your faith influence you when you're swimming?
Good morning, Emily. How are you doing? You alright? It's a big influence to me. It's my way of worship, I find. I'm not a leader in a church. I'm not in the worship group, and so we do everything for God, and this is my way of worshiping Him.
Do you feel that God is on your side when you win, and is not winning a sort of challenge? Do you believe?
Well, I said this to someone the other day. Every time I race, I always pray before my race. And I don't necessarily pray to win. I always pray to, whatever's meant to be, kind of meant to be. A good example of this is in 2016, I was in the trials for the Olympic Games in Rio. I was going in first position, and I failed to qualify, and I was devastated. And that day, I felt as if God was very close to me. And so I thought, well, I'm going to dominate this. And after the race, and for weeks later, I was questioning God, and I thought, where were you when I needed you? And only a few weeks after the race, I realised that I felt like God was with me because He knew I couldn't deal with that loss on my own,
So knowing, having a faith, do you find that's then a sort of a comfort, whatever happens?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a comfort because, swimming won't last forever, like I could easily walk outside now, trip over and break my ankle, my career's over. Well, nothing can hinder my faith. My faith is everlasting. God, for me and for everyone, is everlasting. He's not exactly going anywhere.
Sure. Well, can I turn now to Katrina MacDonald? As a coach, how do you integrate faith into someone's training? Do you find it helps, perhaps with emotional and mental focus or self-belief?
Well, Emily, I think as Daniel eloquently put, it's such a big part of who he is as a performer. So as a coach, you can't ignore that. It's really important to recognise sports people and athletes as holistic people. And so if you want to get the best out of their performance, you need to recognise every part of them and then support that. And then through that, they feel in a way that you have their back, and then in that sense they will always perform to the best of their ability, because if you ignore, I think it's hard to ask them to perform at a very high level, and in that sense, as the way Daniel spoke there, is a huge part of who he is, and so to ignore that would be a mistake as a coach.
And do you think it used to be ignored? I mean, are you saying that now a coach like yourself would kind of bring that in? And it's interesting, isn't it, that some of these high-profile sports figures are talking about their faith.
To be honest, I think it's very dependent on the athlete, and I don't think in coaching we personally as coaches necessarily ignored that aspect. But I think in performance sport, we've moved very much away from this no compromise approach to actually we need to support athletes and their well-being, their resilience, and not as products. And I think in that sense, it's not necessarily that we've changed in the way that we were as coaches, but I think the environment within which we work has changed and recognised that we have to support people in all aspects. And if an athlete says to me, this is really important to me, then you support them, whether it was being a student or something that was really other areas that were really important to them. So for me personally, it would be dependent on the athlete and the approach and the conversations that we had.
And Daniel, I just wondered, is your faith and the sort of iron-willed find that in conflict?
No, I don't think so, because, well, I've never been questioned faith or anything, because I don't know how to explain this actually. I've always been a Christian. I was very fortunate. I was brought up in a Christian atmosphere, and my family and the community that I was brought up in is a very Christian community. And you know, it's one of the first things that I talk about when you get to know me. You know, like, but no, I don't think this bit does anything or hinders my support anyway.
I mean, it's interesting. I'm only asking you because I know the Liverpool coach Jurgen Klopp has said that the problem with being a Christian and managing a Premier League team is that you like to see others have success. So I just wondered if, at any point, that sort of ruthless grit, the desire to win, to beat others, is at all hampered by having a faith.
No, I definitely don't think so. Like, you know, yes, I'm a competitor. It's my job to win, but that's just my job. You know, I'm still talking about my competitors. I'm still good friends with my competitors. It's just when we're in the pool, my race lasts for 15 minutes, and in that 15 minutes, I want to win. But it doesn't necessarily mean I want the competitors to fail. You know, I just want to be a little bit better.
Sure. And Katrina, in terms of the people you're coaching, have you found that actually faith is helpful? You know, do you find that actually if there is a faith and you work with it, that sometimes they can perhaps ride the ups and downs? I mean, I was interested in what Scotty Scheffler was saying, that he feels secure about his identity in his playing. It's sort of that whatever happens, he still feels that it's meant to be and that he feels secure in his identity.
I think there's so much pressure on athletes to perform sport, especially Olympic sports. You know that shot comes along every 4 years, and Daniel mentioned about you know, the Rio Games, having not made a games and knowing the next one isn't for another 4 years. That can be such an immense feeling. So it is fantastic when the athletes feel like they have another community that they can talk to about it within their faith. So I do think it can be very, very valuable. But as I said, we really have to concentrate on working with the individual athlete and, you know, their experiences and how they feel, and part of their intersectionalities. So, you know, which parts of them are important and how we make them up as a whole people. And so I do think that, yes, it is great that people have faith and they have someone to lean back on. And so we've seen very much in the press when people haven't made the cut for the games, and it can spiral and it can lead to very terrible things. So sure. I do think it can be very valuable.
And just briefly, Daniel, are you praying for success at the Paris Olympics?
I am praying that it will go the way it should go. But yes, I would love to come home having been successful, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Daniel Jervis and Katrina McDonald. Personal names have spiritual and religious meanings in the Christian tradition, but what if you carry an inherited surname that you feel is profoundly un-Christian? Should you keep it or change it? Professor Robert Beckford, a theologian who's regularly appeared on this programme, is going through that very dilemma. His surname is a slave name, a brand of ownership passed down from his enslaved African ancestors in Jamaica. Over time, Robert's grown deeply uncomfortable with it, so he's embarked on a journey considering whether he should change, alter or keep his inherited name.
I'm in London and it's another overcast day, but I'm not too concerned about the weather because I'm here to visit the Guildhall where the statue of Alderman Beckford is situated. I'm interested in Alderman Beckford because he was a slave owner in 18th century Jamaica, and he enslaved my ancestors and gave them the name Beckford as a brand. Every time I look at that statue, I get traumatized. I think about the fact that this man enslaved Africans, was a terrible slave owner. In 1760 he had 400 of them who decided to rebel, killed, and the leader of the rebellion burned alive. So why should I now continue to have this slave name, Beckford? Is it something that can be redeemed? After all, my family have had this name for generations and have been quite comfortable having the name in Jamaica and even in Britain as well. But there's another side to this. I want to know if, as a Christian, having a name that signifies oppression, brutality and destruction is actually spiritually healthy. I'm on my way to a church in Lancaster to meet Anderson Jeremiah, the soon-to-be Bishop of Edmonton. Anderson was born in South India, but he doesn't have a traditional Indian-sounding name.
It was the name of one John Anderson. He was the first educational missionary who came and worked and set up several schools in South India, who had very noble ambitions, but also, as with any missionaries, he was of the colonial establishment at that point in time.
Anderson tells me that in India, names signify social and caste status. Before his grandparents converted to Christianity, his original family name was a Dalit name. Dalits are the social group at the bottom of the Indian caste system. Historically, many Dalits escaped the discrimination associated with their names by converting to Christianity and taking a Christian name. Changing their names was political, but also liberated people from the caste system and gave them new opportunities.
Now, retrospectively looking back at my own childhood, people struggled to put me, because my name was Anderson Jeremiah, because I didn't give any clues which caste I belonged to.
What does it mean for your ethnic identity then if you take on this new Christian name and Christian Indian identity? Do you have to suppress it, or does it maintain its presence?
This goes to the heart of the theological struggle in India. My grandfather's generation, who were the first converts, so they embraced a whole new identity. In the process, they didn't want us to know their hardships, their direct experience of untouchability, of day-to-day lived discrimination. I like my biblical name Jeremiah. It sounds good. He's a troublemaker, so I like that idea. But Anderson is my first name, so do I want that name? To be an authentically Christian, and to be authentically Indian, and to be authentically Dalit in my experience, I had to really think, does this name capture what I am seeking to be?
I feel quite shaken up actually. I'd suppressed in my mind and in my spirit about my name and what it meant to me. And as I was talking to Anderson Jeremiah, I had flashbacks, you know, of being a child in school, hearing them calling out my name. And I felt it brought back a degree of confusion and anxiety and uncertainty. But I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. I think I needed that as a starting point. I've gone to meet someone who also grew up with the name Beckford, my sister. When she decided to keep Beckford and hyphenate it with her husband's name, Bologun. I wanted to know what she thinks about me possibly changing my name and why she chose to keep hers.
Well, I never would have changed my name, whatever it was, when I got married anyway, because your name's sort of like your identity. But it wasn't because I was in love with the history of it. I think Daddy romanticised it very much. Yes, it's the slave owner's name, but yes, it also meant something to him. I wouldn't like you to just go through a dictionary, for example, and then just come up with a name. I'd want to think that you'd actually thought about where does this name come from? Is it actually linked to your line of ancestry?
I'd try and give myself a name that either represented who I was now in terms of the work that I've done as a black liberation theologian, as a broadcaster, as an activist scholar. Is there a name that encompasses my being and my experience now? Or do I take on a name from the Bible that is a prophetic name, somebody who represents the kind of aspirations that I would have for myself spiritually? Or, you know, do I look for an African name like you and say, actually, you know, with DNA testing, I know that my people can be located in a part of West or Central Africa, as you have done.
Do you remember Daddy used to tell us the story of when there was the uprising of the slaves? But it just made me think, that revolutionary, now looking at us, what would he actually say to us? He'd probably say, why on earth have you still got that name? Look at what we fought for. I gave my life for your freedom. Now you have the conversation, it does actually really make me think, what would our ancestors say? I'm not sure they'd be very proud of us.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm thinking now, having talked to you, that maybe the task isn't necessarily to abolish the name. Maybe the task is to maybe try and disrupt it in some way to symbolize the fact that I have this name, but I'm contesting it.
I like that and I prefer that.
This has been quite a journey and now I need to make a decision. I've decided to keep the Beckford name, but write my surname with a strike through because I wanted to retain the memory of the Beckford family, but also wanted to contest this history, to demonstrate that the name is an imposition. This feels much more righteous to me because I feel much more liberated. And the Christian faith is about liberating you from all forms of oppression. So to actually make a decision and to see this surname in a completely new way is a relief.
Professor Robert Beckford, and you can listen to the full documentary on the BBC's Heart and Soul programme on BBC Sounds. Salman Rushdie's latest book, Knife, a memoir of the near-fatal attack he suffered 2 years ago, was published last week. Coincidentally, there were two other horrific knife attacks in Australia. A 16-year-old stabbed an Orthodox bishop and several churchgoers, while a few days earlier in a Sydney shopping centre, a knife-wielding man killed 6 people. Last Monday, here in the UK, a Muslim convert who'd been plotting a knife attack at the Isle of Wight festival was jailed for 7 years and being questioned in court in Teesside, a man accused of stabbing his Christian convert housemate and subsequently murdering a stranger. So how to explain these disparate attacks? Are they motivated by religious extremism or mental illness? We can talk now to Professor Kevin Brown, forensic psychologist at Nottingham University Medical School and a leading authority on knife crime. So, Professor, what proportion of knife crime is represented by religiously motivated attacks? Do you know that?
Not exactly, but we know it's a very small minority. There are around 4,500 knife attacks by people under the age of 18 recorded each year in England and Wales. And a very small minority of that is related to religion.
And has that small minority been increasing?
We really wouldn't have the information to know if it's increasing. What we do know is that the chances of religious-related attacks are always there. They're based on what we see as we call paranoid ideation, which is a type of thinking characterized by persistent false suspicion and distrust of others. And what the person believes is that those people are going to cause them harm and treat them unfairly in some way, and therefore heightens their fear and anxiety, and they may attack them as a result. And so we know that there are two types of knife crime. There are gang-related knife crime offences, which are instrumental to deal with competition for selling drugs or county lines and territory. And there's no real anger associated with that or fears of threat. And then there's individual knife crime committed by an individual, and religious knife crime is more likely to fall into that category.
So when you have
this,
so when you have these lone attackers, I mean, often the way that many are portrayed in the news as possibly having religious motivation, but can you separate the religion from the mental illness? You talked about a sort of ideation, religious ideas coming into the mental illness. Can you explain that?
Well, some of it is mental illness. About 60% of individuals, 60 to about 2/3 of individuals who commit knife crime have periods of mental illness. But there's also the concept of personality disorder. Paranoid ideation or paranoia is highly associated with personality disorder, both borderline and antisocial. And in those instances, mental illness won't be obvious in the individual. It's not the same as mental illness such as schizophrenia, where you have paranoid schizophrenia and people hear voices on those voices. That would be classed as mental illness. There's also this other area of personality disorder, often associated with adverse childhood experiences, that can lead people to hold paranoid thoughts and attack others.
And of course, sometimes there's quite a public debate, isn't there, as to whether someone who's committed such a crime should go to prison and be punished or go to hospital. Certainly that was the case, wasn't it, in Nottingham with the stabbings there?
Yes, in our own, we of course were victims in our own medical school when our students were stabbed to death. The assailant, Valdo Calcain, pleaded diminished responsibility, and indeed when he was assessed with paranoid schizophrenia, he was